Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Dorothy Dalton, and I'm here today with Ian Dinwiddy of Inspiring Dads. And today we're going to talk about sharing the load and the importance of gender balance at home. My role, for those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO of 3+ International, and we work in supporting organisations to achieve diversity, gender balance and inclusion. And I also support women to achieve their potential. Ian, why don't you talk to us about your role?
Hi, thank you very much, Dorothy. Thank you for having me here. My story, I guess, goes back to late 2009, 2010, when my daughter was born, and after 6 months, I became a stay-at-home dad, and I did that a couple of times during the mid-early 2000s with both my daughter and with my son, and so I got an enormous insight into some of the dynamics of sort of parenthood that I think men don't usually get the opportunity to be involved in, and the highs and the lows of that. And coming out of the back of that, I was looking for something that I could do as a career. Previously been a management consultant, and that involved a lot of time away from home, and being away from home didn't really fit with our family goals, our family vision of how we were going to live our lives. My wife works as a lawyer. Her hours were very, very long, although they were London-based, and I could be away from home. So we wanted one of us always to be there. And then I came across coaching, which I guess in many ways included some of the elements of things that I really enjoyed about management consultancy in terms of helping people to achieve the best that they can within the environment and understanding what good looks like and how to get there, and helping people on that journey. So after I did some training, I was looking to understand what my niche would be, and initially it was parents. But what I realized was I got an enormous amount of satisfaction and pleasure with working with dads in particular, and helping to navigate the complexity of modern life, really, where there are demands both on their own time and their own interests in terms of work and fatherhood in particular. So Inspiring Dads was set up a couple of years ago, and so it's all about helping stressed dads to balance work and fatherhood.
I think that's what's quite interesting, is that you're all also looking for work-life balance for dads, because there's been an assumption really that most households tend to be based on one major revenue generator and one childcarer and homemaker. But I think modern times that's shifting. And one of the reason I suggested this call was that during COVID, and it's something that actually has bugged the hell out of me, because I don't get it, basically, is that women are complaining how they are left with the bulk of household chores. This is something I just don't understand. And in fact, I've even raised it in groups of other women who work in the same space, and they think I'm being a bit harsh, because I think it's a relationship issue and something that most couples should try and work out at home. I don't think gender balance at home is a workplace issue. So this is some stats which I got from Eurostat, and this was how men and women are performing in terms of household chores. And this is before COVID, right? So you can see that Sweden, which is way out there, where there's a much closer balance between men and women doing household chores. And you're getting right down back to Hungary, where you've only got men doing 14% of household chores. So there's quite a disparity across Europe. And recently I was doing some work for the European Institute of Gender Equality on sexism in the workplace. And one of the stats that really stuck out for me was that there are still some countries where culturally there is an expectation that a woman's place is in the home. And I found that quite shocking in the 21st century. And I actually would imagine by the time you've reached my time of life that nothing would shock you anymore, but it always does. So, and these are some stats that I put together specifically for today. And these are COVID stats. So women are doing 12 hours more of household chores per week. Ian, if this contradicts anything that you've got in your little batch of stats there. Speak up.
No, not at all. No, they don't contradict. There's part of the picture, but definitely, yeah. No, there's nothing I haven't seen there before, actually.
Okay, women's unpaid hours at home during COVID have doubled. Okay, so the unpaid hours, they were always doing more unpaid hours than men, but now they doubled. And this was an interesting stat which I saw from the UK, which said that women are interrupted more than fathers for homeschooling. So these were kind of standout stats because I was just thinking why that is. And the reasons that I've been given by different women I've worked with was that, and this might sound familiar to you, Ian, it's quicker to do it myself. He does a really bad job of it anyway. You know, I have to explain everything. It takes too much time. It's all in my head. I do the thinking work. He doesn't know. And it's about not being able to say no, particularly when the kids pose a question. So it would seem that dad can say no, go and disturb your mum, but the mum can't say no, go and disturb your dad. So that's a sort of a boundary issue. So I don't know how all of this sits with you and your findings.
I think it's been really well recognised that women are taking the brunt, certainly within a COVID situation, the brunt of the additional household work. But men are also doing more. They're just not doing as much more as women are doing. And I think the problem with that is that the gap gets larger. And so, for instance, some Office of National Statistics information from the UK showed that the number of hours that men were doing on childcare had increased by an average of 58%. Now, obviously, those stats suggest it's more like 100% for women, but 58% for men. So for individual men, they're feeling like they're really pulling their weight. And this is one of the things that we need to recognise is on an individual basis, men may not realise that what's going on is necessarily a problem. And there's some really, I'll come on to a bit later in terms of stats around women losing their jobs and the impact of childcare, the access to childcare and what that means and how couples can perhaps navigate that a little bit better. But there's a real sense, I think, of optionality in that information is that businesses assume that men have the option to opt in and out of activity outside of home activity outside the workplace, and we kind of end up sort of half-heartedly sort of reinforcing that in a lot of couples. It's not to say that it's wrong, and one of the things that I like to make really clear to my male clients is that it's not for me to tell you how to arrange your life and your work patterns. However, if you don't have equality, then there are a series of issues that can come back and affect your relationship with your family, your relationship with your children, and the general happiness in the home. And if you get it wrong and don't spend time and creating and designing a life that works for all of you, then you will ultimately lose your relationship. And that's the thing that I think men don't necessarily join the dots early enough. They just kind of see like, actually, I can dip in and out of this because someone's got my back. I don't need to worry about this because if I don't do it, then actually my wife will do it. And, it becomes difficult sometimes for men to take it seriously if they know that it's not going to be covered off, if someone's always looking out for them. So I think that's one of the challenges. Can
I just recap there then? If what I'm hearing from you is that if a man leaves a gap, a vacuum, then the wife or the mum or the partner will move in to fill that space.
I think so, yeah. I think men need to be allowed to make mistakes within the family environment. There's something I wrote down was that, and I never did it. I was a stay-at-home dad a couple of times, but you never forget the nappies more than once. Okay, if you've got young children and you don't pack the nappy bag properly, you're a dad solo parenting, you don't do that again, because the consequence, you will remember to make sure there are enough nappies. However, if that bag is always packed by your partner and you don't need to worry about what's in there, you never have to check it, then you never learn some of those skills and some of those sort of problem solving in terms of children. You never have to do it on your own. Mm-hmm. And I think solo parenting for dads is so important in terms of both their relationship with their children, but also just practical, sharing of the load in the home. So yeah, I think
I want to leap in there with a bit of a comment then. Are you suggesting that some wives and partners or mums are infantilizing their partners by not trusting them to do a good enough job?
there's elements of that. I don't think it's necessarily trust. Sometimes it's about standards. You get used to certain things, and we have to sort of meet people where they are. And actually, I'm in my early 40s, still early 40s, but I grew up in the 80s, and most relationships, the women were the lead carers, and the men went out to work, and that's how we grew up, and that's the kind of modelling that we have. And so we learn the kind of expectations that we see from our parents and the people around us. And I think, a lot of the expectations from that generation was that the man went to work and then he didn't really have a lot else that he needed to be doing. But the women learned, and young women, girls learned different priorities in a sense. And therefore, I do think it's important for women to let go a little bit of the standards possibly, and just give it to a man and just say, right, this is your part of the role. I don't mind how you do it. This is what the outcome's going to be. In the same way that a great coaching relationship, within a workplace is about, right, this is the objective. Let me know if you need any help. But you don't sort of hold them through that process and tell them off as you're going through. So I think there's room for men to be more proactive, certainly. But I think women can be better at letting it go. I actually had this conversation just before we came on, our tail end of lunch, with my wife, and we were talking about the topics we were going to discuss today. And she said about how I think women sort of correct things too easily and too quickly. Better just to let it happen, and then just, okay, I really liked what you did here. I would, if we do a bit more of this, or if you did it in this way, it would be even better, rather than jumping in too early, because that's when men are just like, well, okay, it is, the best one in the world. It can be off-putting, and I think it's just letting people make mistakes, letting the man go out without any nappies in the bag. I think that's a powerful motivation.
Do you think sometimes men underperform so they won't get asked to do it again?
Without doubt. I find it really difficult to have these conversations because it's not really me. And also, I didn't grow up in this kind of environment. Our mum had multiple sclerosis from the age, and I was 10 when she was diagnosed. So I grew up very much as, the three men in the house very much had to roll their sleeves up and get involved. And so I didn't really have this sort of culture where men were just the breadwinner. Mm-hmm. So that element is a bit trickier, but yeah, I think you see it sometimes with people, some of my friends. We know a couple who we saw relatively recently, and I hope I don't out them or out anyone else. But their relationship from the start has been based around that he just hasn't really done very much, and that predated COVID, predated kids. Got 3 kids now, and he doesn't really do anything particularly unless he sort of actually actively asked to do so, and they've just kind of slipped into that. So, and that can be difficult to break, I think. And it can be, she isn't working, she's highly educated, I've known her for years. He is, but he could do more, but it kind of works for them. So there is a difficulty here where, if it's not working for you as a couple, then you need to address it. But if it is working, that's not to say it doesn't. Those traditional roles can create an enormous amount of sort of stability within a relationship. But like you said, Dorothy, in terms of the numbers, I think in the UK, I think it's 82% of women with dependent children are in work of some form or other. So the numbers are enormous. Most families. Most heterosexual families with 2 parents, they're both working. I expect, and it goes whether it's heterosexual or not. If there are 2 parents, they are most likely to be both working. And so those days where we could just leave certain responsibilities, whether that was earning or whether it was caring, to one or other of them, I think are behind us quite a long way.
So I think a key message, and this is one that I've been reflecting on, is basically letting go of the perfectionism. That seems very clear. So one of the questions that I get asked quite a lot if I do workshops on dual career coaching or this area is, how do you go about having that conversation, without starting a third world war or a divorce, and, get that balance. Now, the other factor is that generally, not always, but quite often, the man will be the main revenue generator, even though the woman is in the workplace and might have a really good job because of a gender pay gap. the guy will be tend to be earning more. And that is an argument that is frequently raised when they start to have these discussions. So just let's do what's if, that to a couple who comes in, they want to, or it's usually the woman, I have to say, not the man. I've never come across a man who wants to do more housework.
No. Why? Yeah.
Why would you change a wheel that's not squeaking? So it's usually the woman who is feeling overloaded and stressed. So what advice would you give to her?
To her, it's difficult. I think you need to recognize where you're starting from. I think that's the important thing. And the example of the friends that we've got, they're starting from a position where one of them has never done that kind of domestic labor. So you've got to recognize where you're starting from and make incremental steps from there. It is really difficult because I think, as you said, and this is the hardest one of the questions when we were when I was prepping for this, I think this is the hardest one of all of them. I think there is an element that men feel like they can opt in and out, and frequently there isn't a consequence to that behavior. And you need to start to line up the consequences and line up the data in some ways. And I think there's a lot of power in understanding what the day looks like for both of you and to mapping it out. What time you get up, what activity do you do, who are you looking after, who are you caring for, and get it all down on paper so that you can see exactly what's going on on a day-to-day basis and where the pressure points are. Because I think a lot of it, I think, comes down to particular times that are difficult, at the tail end of the day, certainly with young children, when actually it's all hands on deck, or during COVID and lockdown and any aspect of homeschooling, there are particular chunks of the day where we need to be spreading the load a lot better. So I think understanding the data, I think understanding what it is that the totality of what needs to happen in the home, and then saying, well, who's going to pick this up, and almost giving it as a project to a man and saying, look, we've got all these things to do. I want you to own this bit. It may not be, the old joke is about the bins. It's like the man taking out the bins. It's an old cliche. But I think, let's expand it a bit more than that and saying, actually, whatever it might be, I don't know, maybe science, I don't know, that's a horrible cliche, isn't it? Maybe the man has the science homework to do, and then in this hour, I know that's a horrible one. I was about to go into mathematics, and then I've gone into science. But taking saying French homework, Dad, that's your job to do French homework, and you need to schedule that in because that's your particular skill set. It is to help the kids with that, and then it's up to him to schedule it in and when it gets done, and we just understand what the deliverables are. In the same way, I think I see men who are incredibly successful at work and somehow come home and lose all those skills around project management and getting things done and stakeholder management and looking and having difficult conversations with the children, and they just leave all that side because they can, and they suddenly become this almost childlike entity within the home. And I do see it sometimes with friends. You're like, hang on, I know what you do for a living, then why can't you cope with this particular task? And sometimes you just got to, I think, for women, you understand what's going on, what needs to be done, and then allocate things out so that they can be kicked off.
I like the language you're using around the totality of the situation, the project management. I mean, because I think one of the things is that I hear as a complaint is around the thinking work. And certainly I think it's about sitting down and making a list of everything that each partner does. And I think because very often women aren't involved in finances or cutting the grass or changing plugs or whatever it is. So I think that we've got ourselves into these gender stereotype traps. So I think it's the first project for me is sitting down and, to use your language, looking at the data. So what is the job description, the brief for running our household and our family and our relationship?
Yeah.
And then allocating. How do you allocate?
I think you need to be open and honest about there'll be things that neither of you want to do, and possibly you have a list of, right, okay, I like to do these things, I like to do these things, and these are the things we need to share out. I think you're right about the mental load. I think that sort of hidden sort of emotional labour is something that I understand, because I kind of do all the admin around the kids and I do the pick up and drop offs to school and that sort of thing. So I sort of see how much time it takes. But interestingly enough, my wife doesn't opt out of any of those things. So I think all of this comes back to what you were saying at the start, Dorothy, in terms of relationships. And this equality at home is an enabler of equality in the workplace, I think, because I think it takes the physical and emotional labour that goes on in the house can be a drag on women going back into the workplace, and it can be a drag on being able to go for promotions because they've just got too much on. But what's really important, I think, about this is that we have those open and honest conversations, and maybe even once we've got the sort of stability in terms of the things that are going on in the home, is also to look at ultimately as a family, what are we looking to achieve? Where do we want to live long term? What are our priorities in terms of children's education? Things like that. Some of those big kind of ideas about the sort of people we want to be and what we want to do and what we want to have, and then say, actually, why are we chasing this? Why are we continuing to earn money? This amount of money, when actually that isn't really what we need to achieve our goals as a family. But I think that's a little bit later on. But just getting stability and saying, actually, being really honest, I'm completely overwhelmed. The sort of the stress levels, and it drives into intimacy as well between couples. Is that if you're stressed and worn out with your tasks, then, and that tends to be something that men pay slightly more attention to than necessarily equality per se. Because you say, if the wheels, if it's not broke, why fix it? And if I don't have to do it, if I don't have to check the nappy bag, then why would I? Because someone else has done it for me.
I sent you a really interesting paper. I don't know if you had a chance to read it. It was sent to me by a colleague of mine, Sophie Ann Brack, who is going to listen to the recording. And if I was reading the research correctly, it was done, I think it was in the University of Sussex. And they were saying that men will respond. It's about communication. And men will respond to negative communication. So I read that to mean nagging.
Yeah.
And they will actually do more work, but they receive that as also a negative impact on the relationship. So I would imagine that relates to your point about intimacy. So I just wondered for me to nag someone doesn't seem a very effective way of going about it. But
no, I think sometimes the skills that we have in the workplace are skills that we sometimes lose in the family home, in the same way that men possibly lose some of their skills in terms of, just getting themselves organized in terms of maybe taking the kids out for the day on their own, for instance, which shouldn't be that hard to do. Even with little ones, you get used to it quite quickly and you work out what you need. But equally, if you were in a workplace scenario and you had a boss who told you what you wanted to do and then stood over you and corrected everything you did as you were typing on the computer, then you would fit that wouldn't be conducive either. We wouldn't manage people in the workplace. We don't manage our children like that in many ways. We don't sort of stand over them while they do their homework. We make sure they understand what the task is and what they need to do, and make sure they're in a place where they've got the tools available to get that job done and to do the homework. And then we might say, we're going to check on you, come back. If you've got any problems, ask me. And then if not, then I'll see you in half an hour or however long that exercise sort of takes. So I think trying to put to one side some of those frustrations with possibly the speed in which things get done and the quality, and treating it more as we actually, more in terms of how we treat children, how we help children to learn, and how we would do things in a workplace, in terms of supporting someone and coaching them through it. And it tends, and when we reflect in that way, we probably find that we would do things in a different way and certainly communicate in a different way, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to use the workplace analogy and the project management analogy, that the stick method of nagging, I don't think works under any circumstances. And just as it would in the workplace, it will damage, a working relationship, or any relationship. Let's talk about the question of women being interrupted during COVID more than more than the dads. So is that a boundary issue? What's that about?
I think some of that is about a physical space within the home. And I think where, not every job obviously can be done from home, but where there are both members of the couple, both partners are at home, then they're probably, unless you have a very large house, let's be honest, there may be a space, which is the workspace, and then you share, somebody takes control of that workspace. And I think it goes back to the income angle on it, rather than necessarily, and it happened in my house, it happened the other way around. It's, during the week I work out of the office at home. My wife's a law partner, as I sort of mentioned before, and she needs that space for her calls, and she's fully utilized. She's doing 60 hours a week and kind of does it all the time, pretty much. I would 60, something like that, 50, 60 hours a week. And so she took over that space. So then I moved to the dining room table, and we had laptop at one end, one child halfway down, one child at the end. So I'm doing the work around the children, and it has been driven to a certain extent by whose role is more important. I think sometimes that's part of it. But that said, there are certain things where my wife blocked out her diary to supervise, and so we set that aside so that she would then clear her diary and say, right, this is the time where I'm going to support the kids. And whether it's cello practice or some of the ballet stuff that my daughter did remotely, whatever it might be, we've actually sort of blocked that time, and we've looked at the schedule overall and said, well, where do each of the children need support? And I must admit, I've tended to get up early in the morning to fit things in, and I work a Saturday now. So I think some of that interruption is because actually we are whoever's got the prime spot is going to be able to shut the door to a certain extent, but also it goes back to what the kids have learnt already. If you've got a 5 and 6 year old who, when both parents are there, it's always mum who responds, then they're just going to know that mum's the one who's going to respond. And the best one in the world, it's quite hard to break that on a short-term basis, I would imagine. But I think thinking about where you work and and setting aside time to be open to the kids.
To come in with a suggestion, I don't know what you think of it, but the actual setting up of a calendar, a daily calendar, and I'm thinking particularly if you have two partners who have balanced professional commitments, then there would be some value in, if the mum is constantly being disrupted, to say, you have to wait for your dad's slot, you have to take a slot together where you're both off. I mean, it's about a way of managing it in terms of the priorities for the day.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think you need to you have a schedule for the day, and everyone's needs are met, and so everyone's working needs and the family needs, and I think it does require not just slipping into it, and you're actually taking a step back and saying, actually, this isn't working for me, and being really open and honest as a couple and saying, look, we need to do things differently. There are plenty of couples out there who have changed and done things differently. I was only recently at football training. A friend of ours, and he was saying, well, I spend 2 hours in the morning doing homeschool with the kids because it's important because I want to be involved, and B, my wife needs to work as well, so I've got that's my 2 hour slot, and she has that slot, and then we sort of mix and match in between. He definitely earns more than she does, but he said, well, it's important, so therefore I'm going to do it. I think men often are concerned about showing that side of them in the workplace, that element of being that they want. A lot of men do want to be active and involved fathers, but sometimes they don't feel that they can show it, and sometimes men just need to be a little bit braver, because actually businesses want to support their dads and their parents more generally, but sometimes you've got to put your hand up and say, actually, I need to block out this time. And this is what I'm doing, and be open and honest about it, because then the other men who are thinking about it go, oh, actually, James takes 2 hours out every morning. Well, if he can do it, then I can do it, and he's catching up, and we're all getting our work done. It's a strange time at the moment, obviously, as we're starting to come out of lockdown and people are returning to the workplace. I think that creates an element of pressure.
Yeah, I agree. But when I'm working with men leaders, I always say that quite often they leave the office at 4 o'clock as though they're going to a G7 summit. And, really they're doing the nursery run or, whatever it is. And, it helps everybody if they're very open and that they trust their teams to deliver on their objectives, even though they might be, the nursery run or the ballet class or whatever it is. And I think that transparency in the workplace will help dads a lot at home.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's an enabler. I think men look to male role models, and I think I think you're absolutely right. It's a real big change. You need flexible working and remote working to be not just to be a perk of seniority, and also not just to be something that women do. Because generally speaking, structured flexibility is something that carers need, and the more men who can demonstrate and show that, it makes it okay for everyone else. And men do want to be more involved. GQ magazine in the UK they had their, I think it's the 20th anniversary of the magazine, and they asked their male readership what were the number one aspects of modern masculinity, and the top one was 66% was being an active and involved father. And that was the number one thing that men said was important about modern masculinity. And there's lots of other surveys. Certainly generationally, you find younger men who are becoming dads are much more interested in a more balanced, equal society and equal relationships.
I mean, that's my observation as well. And if anything, that they feel kind of sorry for the men of my generation, that they made all of these sacrifices, for what? But one of the things that I really want to touch on, because it's something that I hear a lot, is the anticipation of need. So, there's the dishwasher with all the dishes in it, and it's not going to magic itself empty, right? Somebody has got to do it. And I hear so much from women doesn't think about it. So what is your tip for getting around that?
It was the nappies one. We've used the nappies one before. Again, it's difficult because I think there needs to be, if it is the man's role to do, then he's more likely, yes, I've done it. Now he might want to be celebrated in some form or other. But if he doesn't feel it's his job to do, he may just feel like, I've never done that before. Why would I do it? Because it just doesn't see it, I think, sometimes. I mean, I live with a guy in my 20s, and it was three young men living together, and two of us were away all week. The dishwasher was run on the Sunday night, and when we both came back on the Friday, and the dishwasher was still full of clean stuff. And our housemate all week had piled up every single item that he'd used on top. And we were 20-year-old men, and it was just insane. We had a right go. It was like, but he just thought, well, I'll get round to that later. There was no, apart from us telling him off, it only happened once. But there was no sort of comeback to it. I don't know. And so I think sometimes men just don't see it. But I think if you take it back to allocating responsibilities, then I think that's so important. Or sometimes just saying, I'm doing this, can you help do this? Or I'm doing this bit.
Help,
no, I totally agree. I know. I think you need to meet, although I hate it as well, I think you need to meet people where they are. So if your partner is very much of the view that he is helping and he has been the breadwinner and he has done his role and I am helping you out, you kind of need to meet him where he is in some ways. And I think you role model by him doing stuff. You role model for the next generation in some ways. I think that's one of the really important things from my perspective, is that it may be difficult to change your partner's attitude and get things done. There are things we've talked about in terms of changing, in terms of allocating activity and talking about the consequences. But actually, we need to think about what sort of person we want our sons to grow up into, what sort of opportunities we want our daughters to have, and to use now as an opportunity to kind of change, get off the wheel a little bit and stop repeating the same behaviors. And it may not be perfect, and it may not be exactly what everyone needs or what you need as a woman, but we can show our children a different way of doing things and so just edge away. Because single dads, and let's be honest, we're solo dads who are single or solo and have charge of their children full time. They don't fail in the way that men in relationships seem not to be able to do things. Solo dads do not have this a problem. It's because it's all down to them, I think, and they just kind of they find their own way, and obviously they find their own way. But kids are not going hungry, and they aren't being they're being looked after, and they're having their emotional and practical needs met. I think sometimes men get away with stuff because they always have in some ways. I think maybe that's a little. I mean, I've been a little bit harsh on my brothers as in inverted commas, but I think it's an important thing that it's got to be a consequence for men. They've got to feel like there's something they gain something from it. There's a downside they want to avoid.
So I'm just sort of doing a little recap in my head. So we've got the letting go of perfectionism. We've got the setting up a structure. We haven't talked much about women feeling a need they want to be in control of the house because this is their domain. What do you think of that?
I recognise it, certainly. I think that it goes back to how much does it matter to you? If that works, if that traditional role works for you, then that's fine. And if a man is working and the woman's not, and majority of we've just had our 12th wedding anniversary, for the majority of our lives as a couple, as together, then I've been the lead for all that kind of thing. I do more of everything in the house, really. But it works because of our sort of shared purpose. But if you're the one who is, getting up early, going to bed late, and all you're doing is admin, and your husband's had a busy day, and then he's unwinding with a quiet beer, watching his favourite TV show while you're still doing things, then that's clearly unfair. And if that's impacting on you, then you kind of need to address it. If it works as a couple, if you're happy and you enjoy that aspect of it, then I wouldn't say it's necessarily a problem. And then I think it goes back to the role modelling side of things, Dorothy. I think it's then, okay, well, if we have these traditional values within the home, is that problematic for our children and how they're going to grow up and what they're going to perceive as being sort of okay? Or are they just going to, or are actually, if that's how you do things, is your daughter's job prospects long term, or her potential career prospects going to suffer because she's trying to do everything at the same time, because that's what she learned?
Yeah. Years ago, when my kids were at home, a very impactful book on me was Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of an Effective Family. Okay. To what extent do you think you start involving the kids in individual responsibility?
I started when I was 7. Clearly remember a particular holiday where it was washing up and we were all in a little static caravan, and everyone had to muck in, and it rolls on from there. My two do quite a lot. There's an expectation. So I think giving kids a choice is that almost like, are you going to do this or are you going to do that? And then they can't, it's not a yes or no. It's kind of like which of these two activities that need to be done. And we had the conversation with our kids at the start of lockdown, is that, we need them to do more because our cleaner couldn't come to the house. We carried on paying her, but she couldn't come. So the kids got a lot more involved in cleaning activities, and just linking, for kids, linking homework to task. It's I think it's a financial incentive, and they understand that pretty quickly, I think. So treating it rather than maybe kids and adults, and this is, we are a family together, and therefore there are certain things that need to happen. So every mealtime they have their, they set the table, they do the drinks and that kind of thing. So they know, you set out the expectations and ease them along and make sure it happens, I think. So I think as early as you can with the kids.
Yeah, get them to work.
Yeah, exactly. Get the hell out.
Yeah,
I had to. My mum had multiple sclerosis. We had no choice but to be cleaning the house and all the rest of it and keeping everything on top of things, because she couldn't. So I think it's a collective. I think that's the important thing. You're all in it together.
In a workshop I ran on dual careers, someone said outsource low value work. So a real professional term. Obviously, if you can afford to outsource, then you obviously have the money to be able to do that. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think if you can trade time for money, and you can, it depends how much money you've got and how much time you've got. If you haven't got much time, then even if you haven't got much money, I think the gain in time can be quite considerable. So if you're thinking if it takes 3 hours to clean the house, that could be 20% of your free time in the week, realistically, and start to look at it from that perspective. Is actually what could I do with that extra time, and make a judgment on the trade-off. I think, I'm all for getting I get a man in to fix all sorts of things. I have a very, it doesn't matter what it is. My wife always laughs that I don't do a lot of DIY. It's because actually some of it I could do, but it makes more sense to pay someone who will do it properly, and it frees up your time, which you can then spend on other things, and it's good for the economy as well. If we're going to be honest, as long as you're paying the right amount. Yeah. I mean, we with our cleaner, we do something called London Living Wage. So that's the amount that we pay. So it's over and above what you have to pay. But I think it's good for the economy more generally if you can outsource, and you gain the benefit of time, because I think that's the one thing with busy families, is that sometimes the time is more valuable than the money, I think, in some cases. Just kind of depends. But
and then just to wind this up before we do a final recap, certainly that I've read is that the dad who is more engaged at home has a much better personal relationship with his partner, better balance in the workplace. So for me, it sounds like a win-win, and I don't get why there's so much pushback from men and women to go down this path. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think, Dorothy, there's an element of comfort in the certainty of traditional roles and values, and that's worked very well for centuries. I would probably centuries, realistically. I think it's also kids benefit from dads who are engaged and are able to switch off from work, that side of things. I think from a male perspective, then there is a fear of not being seen as committed to the workplace. Is that there is a lot of men in the workplace kind of feel like to get ahead they need to be seen as being all in, and therefore they are reluctant to indicate to people within a working environment that they're anything other than fully committed. I think we're seeing in the last sort of 3-4 months that it's entirely possible to be both. The productivity doesn't go away just because you're more involved with your family and your remote working and that side of things. I think that's dispelled a big part of that. But men do have a fear, and where families have maybe have gravitated towards the man being the breadwinner, then men do fear losing that status and the implication it has on their family, quite honestly. Although sometimes it goes beyond that. So there was the Harvard Business Review published a piece 18 months ago or so, and they looked at an international management consultancy firm, and they interviewed the partners within that firm. And what they found was that how men perceive their partners, their wives' careers, and the financial and the contribution to the family was not related to what the women earned. It was related to the men's attitude towards and how much value the men themselves put upon their women's careers. So there were women who were independently successful, earning good money, and in some ways almost parity with the men. However, the men were able to discount their contribution because they wanted to position themselves there. It was important to them to be seen in their own mind as being the breadwinner. So sometimes it is as much about the emotional relationship, I think, that men and women have and towards value and what success looks like to them, and that can be different. I think there was one where the breadwinners, 40% of them accorded low social status to their wives' work, independent of the financial situation.
So even though they were earning a lot of money, they didn't value the contribution. That sort of brings me back to a point that I was thinking to make earlier, and that is for a lot of families now more than ever, is that people are reliant on the dual income, that the man might earn a higher percentage. But boy, if you lost that other income, that family as a whole would be in big trouble, right?
Yeah, no, and it's something that came up this weekend in the Guardian in the UK. Front page of the Guardian was some research by a charity called Pregnant Then Screwed, and on the front page of the Guardian they found, yeah, it's a great name. Oh, it's brilliant. 72% of UK working mothers had worked fewer hours due to lack of childcare in COVID. 15% had been made redundant or were facing redundancy. They had 20,000 women take this survey in 3 days, and 46% of those who had been made redundant said lack of childcare was the reason.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important. You know, we're talking about 82% of women with dependent children are working. Men can't, you know, if men are serious about equality and they're serious and their standard of living as a family, you can't afford just to let your partner take the brunt of the activity in the home, because, you know, the stats suggest that women are losing their jobs and going into furlough and then losing their jobs off the back of it. Can you afford to go down to one income, or can you actually, is it easier to make sure things are divided up so everyone has a fair crack at the whip in terms of keeping their job? Because it's certainly, that's one of the challenges around COVID, is it is really damaging for women's careers, because we assume that, you know, because women are taking on a much greater share of the domestic and mental load. Yeah.
And I read an interesting piece. I think it was Florida State University, where because the schools are not going back, that even when women are working remotely, they're not allowed to work remotely if they've got childcare responsibilities.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are all sorts of leadership issues, trust issues, moving away from presence culture. And I've used this phrase myself, that, you know, kids are a corporate inconvenience. But somehow we have to find a way around that, just for long-term economies, because if there are fewer kids, that, you know, economies are going to suffer long-term. So,
but there's a certain irony in that, is that I think men whose children appear on a Zoom call are considered to be in touch with their families, and it's a positive and cute, whereas a woman whose children appear on the Zoom call, they've lost control of their family environment. I think the implicit kind of suggestion is very different depending on, you know, whether you're a man or a woman, and that reinforces it.
There is a daddy factor, you know, so that if the man leaves to pick the kid up from nursery, it's, oh, isn't that so sweet? Yeah. And mum does it. Well, she's not, you know, she's working part-time or whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, that's also the bias and the backlash that we have to deal with within organisations. So is there anything else that you wanted to bring up? Anything I should have mentioned but didn't?
No, I don't think so. I think for me, there's essential optionality, and I think we need to be aware that for a lot of dads, then it feels very optional doing this sort of thing, and women need to put pressure on, but also be aware of not nagging. I think it's an important part of it, and need to give responsibility away in some ways, but also within a framework of this is what needs to be done as a whole in our family. And it's simply, when you write it down as a list, you probably find it should become really obvious where the inequalities are. And then that's part of the conversation. It's not just about telling a man to do, right, which bits of these things, which things are you going to take on that's your responsibility, and then just run with it. And then I think but those open and honest conversations are what takes us to moves us away from the frustration that I think certainly a lot of dual income families will suffer with, for sure. I've certainly seen it myself.
And I like the point that you made, and this actually ties in with dual career coaching, is about having joint goals, because quite often women have no goals, and men have these unstated linear goals. Yeah. And it really requires the couple to sit down and make set their own vision, what they want for them and their families, and to sit down and look at it like a project management. So do an audit, as you said, of what tasks are there, and, you know, including the invisible work, the thinking work, and agreeing. I almost prefer to balancing it rather than, you know, making it more equal, but just balancing it, doing what understanding that can change and not getting too stuck in a new normal for doing things.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that just sprung to mind is this idea that woe betide anything happened to someone within the relationship, but if you were suddenly to be taken really seriously ill, does your husband have the skills required to look after your children? If you do everything for them, then where does it go? Suddenly, it's all it's not helping anyone out on a long-term basis, and it goes. But using another analogy, it's kind of a business sustainability. What's your family sustainability sort of plan? You wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket within a business context, and you shouldn't either, I think, in a family situation.
So it's about almost using business processes or a business outlook onto
a bit of redundancy. We both know how to do this, but we both know how to do all of it or most of it, and these are the things that we focus on at the moment. And we make sure we cover off some of those elements. I mean, I know it's sort of running out of time a little bit, but one of the saddest things I found was that I went to a party, and I talked to a female friend of mine, whose husband worked really, really hard and long hours, and that had always been important to him. And I did worry a little bit. So, you guys sort of okay in your relationship? And she said, I feel like I've given up a lot. She had a very good career. I feel like I've given up a lot, and I'm sitting at home in the evenings, and he doesn't seem to make enough of an effort to make it home anywhere close to being on time. And I'm just sitting in the house on my own. And so we kind of left it there. And 3-4 days later, on his LinkedIn profile, it's his second anniversary of his being in that job, in that role. And the first comment was from his wife, and they don't share the same surname professionally, so not a lot of people would have noticed. And she had written, "Congrats, let's catch up." And I thought, if anything cuts to the challenge around the risk that men face in terms of their relationships, of just not paying attention to the bigger picture, then that for me really sort of cut through. When I saw that, I was like, ouch. Oh.
And I do quite a lot of pre-retirement coaching, and I've never heard a senior executive say, "I wish I'd spent more time in the office."
I bet, yeah.
And it's always, "I wish I'd spent more time with my family," and quite often they maybe have been married multiple times. So there is a lesson. Anything else you want to add?
I don't think so. I think that I said I didn't have anything, and I did.
Ian, it has been brilliant. I think that we've given everybody a lot of rich content, a lot of things to think about. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolute pleasure.
And good luck with your daughter and her pierced ears. And I hope they heal.
Yeah, she said they don't even hurt at the moment. So first day, all good.
Okay, well, she's not got to play with them. So anyway, thank you so much. And it's been my pleasure to meet you. Thank you very much.